Hello and welcome to episode 21 of my mostly stock career. Today we are, a couple days past when we should have had another video out, but we'll live, we're going to Duna. It's going to take a couple days to get there anyhow. But what we're doing right now is we're just editing up our encounters a little bit. Now, a lot of my encounters happened after I had already passed by Duna, and I didn't realize this at the time of creating them. But basically what we're doing is we're going faster than Duna for quite a while, and then we're going up past Duna, and then we're coming back down and encountering Duna. And that's perfectly fine since our main Duna mission is actually encountering Duna on the first go. So basically we'll be able to deal with that one first, and then the other ones encounter at different times, like 40-50 days apart. So it's going to be very easy for us to actually get everything into its position on Duna without having to worry about the next thing coming in immediately after and having to deal with it. So what we're doing right now is we're actually just setting up a favorable periapsis for Duna. And what that favorable periapsis, my choice is I'm going to set it up for about 250 kilometers. Now, I did think about going straight to Ike and dropping off my Ike lander in one of the probes, doing a flyby of Ike, but I also thought that if I did a flyby of Ike, I would gain too much speed moving towards the gravity of Duna and then Ike, that it'd cost me way too much delta V to slow down efficiently. I didn't actually consider the fact of trying to slow down at Ike and letting Ike sling me back into Duna, but if I had considered that, then I might have been able to do things a little more efficiently. But we're just going to go straight to Duna because it's less complicated, at least for our first arrival at Duna. So we're not going to do that complicated spin around several orbits type thing. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just grabbing some science from our landers because we have high over the sun science that we need to grab. So we're going to grab all the experiments for that. Remember, the probe that we sent out only got a barometer scan and a temperature scan. So we're doing crew report, materials bay, and mystery goo. And those are, I believe, the only ones we can do out in space that we haven't already done. Now we will be grabbing that science before we send the landers out, so the landers will be all nice and refreshed to actually go on the surface of Duna and grab us some nice science that we can use. But we have our maneuver node basically all done. So we're going straight towards Duna. I'm just testing quick save things. Now, if you hit Alt F5, you can actually name a quick save. Now, I accidentally loaded the wrong one. I was just making sure I had one saved up in case something weird happened during this mission. I'd have something further back to fall back to. Plus, it creates another persistent file because when I was loading into Kerbal Space Program, I was getting a couple of really weird bugs where some of the text was being misaligned. Some of the Kerbal Space Program buildings couldn't be clicked on. Of course, reloading the game fixed that, but in case that actually turns out to be more problematic than I want it to be, I at least have a quick save now somewhere that I can fall back to, rather than a corrupted persistent file. So that's called Before Duna, and we're going to do all the Duna stuff, and I'll probably keep creating more of these kind of as backups. Anyhow, I'm trying to look for Duna. It's way out there in the distance. You probably can't see it. Maybe you can, depending on how full screen the screen is. I don't know. Depends on the resolution and the size of the actual screen you see. But Duna's way out there. Now it's much easier to see because, we're getting closer to it. And I'm just setting up my final maneuver node. And the reason I'm doing this is I basically need to know exactly how much delta V this is going to take so I can time it in a very similar fashion to how we timed it before. But we're going to take this horrible thing and try to rotate it so that it's facing the correct direction, and then we're just going to warp a little ways away, kind of get closer to Duna very slowly. Now, primarily the reason that I want to stop time warping so far away from Duna is I want to make sure that I have plenty of time to do this little trick again, where we just go into Vessel of Flight Engineer, see our acceleration is, we're just going to go with 6, and then we can go with 600, say it's 100 seconds, so that means that 50 seconds before the node is about when we should burn. So if it's in 40 minutes, then we can probably go here to 34 minutes. We'll warp here, of course, making sure that we still warp safely instead of accidentally going past it, because we only have one shot for this. It's not something like warping past a maneuver node on Kerbal, where you can just wait another orbit, a couple of minutes for another orbit to happen, and then solve the problem. This is something we're going to get once, and it's going to take several Kerbal years for it to happen again if we messed it up, unless we wanted to spend a huge amount of delta V trying to fix it. So we're just going to take it easy at 100 times warp, let the computer do it, let Kerbal Space Program stop us, I should say, when we get close and we're actually start getting ready for this burn. Now, one thing is I don't think I'm going to burn at full speed, so I'm probably going to start this closer to a minute rather than around 50 seconds, just because I'm going to accelerate slowly and decelerate slowly, even though, like I said, like we've noticed before, when our acceleration goes up, we know that it goes up when we start burning fuel because there's less mass in the same thrust. So we actually haven't shown a really close shot of Duna yet. We should do that because we've completely forgotten, and wait for it, we're on the night side. This is kind of anticlimactic. Yeah, we're definitely on the night side. We probably wouldn't be able to see anything if it wasn't for the ambient light. Let's see. This is with no ambient light. That's a pretty boring planet. We'll turn that back up so that we can at least see it. We will be on the day side soon enough. Once, of course, we get slowing down, because we're going to slow down, then we'll pop right onto the day side. So actually, the sun just went under the horizon. I should have tried to catch that a little earlier. We could have gotten a shot of the sun going past Duna. Although this would be a really awful time to have something like remote tech, because the sun is on the wrong side. I think our position relative to Kerbal, Kerbal wouldn't be blocked off. I suppose we could talk to Kerbal. Actually, during the burn node, we would lose communication, so if we had something like remote tech, this could be bad for us. Anyway, we're pointing towards our node. Let's do a little more time acceleration because I want to get a little bit closer before we start to actually burn to get into orbit around Duna with, of course, the first vessel we have here. So I'm going to stop all time warp now because I don't want to accidentally overshoot this too much beyond fixing. So, of course, we've got Ike in the background over there. We'll go to Ike later, but right now we're going to focus on Duna since most of the stuff here is meant to go to Duna, and I think this Ike lander actually has enough to do the transfer by itself. So, actually, when we were doing the encounter, we could have encountered Ike and dropped it off on our way by. That might have been pretty smart, but we'll go with this. Okay, we're at a minute. Let's start accelerating up. Of course, slowly start the acceleration. Now we're going to accelerate at max because the thing is pretty stable with, of course, that thrust limiter. And our acceleration is going to go up. Hopefully this will work out all good and well. It'll take a couple of minutes to actually do the burn though. So that, of course, we want to be stable. We're willing to take this extra time to keep this thing stable versus keep it unstable. Now, something to point out, because I can actually say this since we have plenty of time that we're just burning. If you actually design a craft much longer than this, you're going to want to use forward engines. And what I mean by that is, if you notice, we're pushing this craft. That's how this craft is working. We are pushing it in the direction we want it to go. If we were to actually take the engine and put it on the front, so the way it was facing was the engines would basically be pulling the craft, that would be much, much better for much longer craft. And the reason for that is when you push it, you have the chance of, say if we had gimbal enabled and the engine started vectoring up, then basically this whole back section before the docking node would get pushed, the nose would be pushed up as well because the vector would try to rotate it anyway. But the rotate would be opposite for the next section, and then the rotation would be opposite for even the last section, making the whole thing basically just zigzag out of control, and then the engine, of course, pushes more and causes it to compress and break. So it works very poorly if that happens. So if you have anything pretty much longer than this, what you want to do is pull it, because when you pull it, the docking nodes will automatically align to the way they should align when it's being pulled. Of course, that will create a lot of tension on the docking ports and a pulling force rather than a pushing force, but as long as you accelerate and decelerate slowly with your throttle, then it will pose much less threat than accidentally having your ship crumple on you. So if it's much longer than this, like I figured since mine's only a couple docking nodes, I can get away with pushing it, but if I was to use something longer, more train-like, then pulling it would definitely be better. But our thrust-to-weight ratio is actually quite high. Let's take a look at this. Our apoapsis is actually getting down here, so let's start decelerating. That way we can kind of hit this on the mark as close as we can. Now I am very, very lightly tapping the WASD keys to kind of keep myself pointed towards that maneuver node, but it's a little late, so I'm just going to stop for now. Wait until our delta V starts going up, which means we've completed the burn, and I'd say 15-kilometer difference is acceptable. So, we are now in orbit of Duna, and I dare say this is a low orbit. I wonder if it is low orbit. Let's take a crew report and test that. Oh, in space high over Duna, good. I was concerned that I might be in space low on Duna, which means I'd have to go up more in my periapsis to get the high Duna science, but since we're in space high over Duna, we can do all of the high over Duna sciences before, of course, we drop in to go lower when we do our landers. Basically, my idea here is we're going to drop off the Ike probe, and we're probably maybe going to detach the refinery, and then we're going to move the whole station in lower and drop off the landers, or we might even leave the refinery on. I mean, this thing does have well over enough delta V to do the whole thing itself. So we have a lot of stuff to do. I think we have way more data than we need, so I'm not going to process everything. I'm just going to send this one. Of course, if we want to process it later, it's easy enough to process, so it's not much of a problem. Now, if we look at the map really quickly, let's take a look. When's the next thing due to arrive? Well, since they go above us and then slow down, it looks like, I know that the Moon 3 course doesn't encounter it until over here, and the other ones don't encounter it till over there, because like they're already past the encounter point that we would normally hit with their orbits. So we have tons of time, and they're all gonna be skewed a little bit on when they encounter, which is perfect. Oh, what's that warning? Not enough electric charge. Oh wow, we are out of electric charge. Good thing we got into a solid orbit. That way we can wait until daytime to get that charge back, and we can start sending these probes off. So I actually... Let's see. How about we point this thing normal? Just trying to get an idea on what direction that is, and then I'll take it over manually, since the actual computer controls don't work very well with something this massive. So it appears to be pointed up. Oh wait, we don't have electric charge. We can't point normal. That's why the computer wasn't acting so well. But let's check out this sunrise right over Duna. There we go. Nice Duna sunrise. That's pretty awesome. If we could have rotated this thing earlier, then we could have had a really cool, Why is this thing draining so much electric charge? Oh, we're trying to send that, aren't we? Yeah, we're definitely trying to send that science. That's why it's constantly being drained. Completely oblivious to that. I couldn't figure out why we were losing so much. I thought it was the SAS, but it was not. But anyway, if we had actually been able to have electric charge before we came over that sunrise, we could have had a nice little screenshot there, but here we had a nice sunrise. We can actually move this thing back, because I prefer it up there. So let's get started with these probes. Now the probes are unmanned. There's a neat light flickering effect. But the probes are unmanned, they don't have anyone in them, so we don't have to worry about anything. Can we stop rotating? I'm just going to make sure that all of my panels are extended on these, and I'm going to make sure that these big solar panels are indeed retracted before, well, at least the one side is, before I let the probe go, because I don't want to accidentally crash this probe. So we still have a weird strut. Hopefully that doesn't pose any issues. I mean, nothing should be touching it, so it shouldn't be a problem. Especially since we don't detach, but that's still kind of weird how that looks like that. I think we will manage though. So what we're going to do is this probe right here. One's for Ike and the other one is for Duna. And we're going to just... Well, first I want to make sure... Yeah, good thing I checked there. I was a little skeptical about that we wouldn't have fuel in it, because I didn't know if the decouple... It appeared as though when I right-clicked on these, it says disable crossfeed, so apparently the crossfeed re-enabled between, somehow. Maybe I disabled it during that time when all the craft messed up and I had to reload back a distance because one of them exploded violently for no real reason, or just kind of disintegrated, and it didn't really explode. But we're still draining a ton of electric charge. Why? Is it really the SAS that's taking that much? No, it's that solar panel doesn't have direct sunlight. Alright. The probe has its solar panels extended. It should get electric charge once we undock it, so I shouldn't worry about that. What I should do is get the fuel in, though. So we'll grab just from this back tank, because I know that'll keep everything balanced, and we'll fill this thing with fuel. Now the reason I want to fill it with fuel is I have to get this thing in a polar orbit, and if you noticed, we were in an equatorial orbit. So what does that mean? Well, it means we have to do quite the maneuver to actually change this thing up. So I hope they have enough delta V for this type of maneuver. We'll just have to see and test that. I kind of don't want to undock it because I know it doesn't have electric charge, but at the same time I know it's going to get it. So I shouldn't worry too much about this. So let's undock this thing. There we go. Now it's a different craft. Now let's grab onto it. And I want to lock the panel here. Let's see, our electric charge is growing. That's good. And we want to, as casually as we can, get out of being too close to this thing. So we will just slowly drift away, using a little of our RCS. Now, if we wanted to technically be most efficient, since RCS has the lowest ISP, it'd be most efficient to use that as fuel first. However, it doesn't make too much of a difference with this probe. I'm pretty sure it has more than enough delta V to make this work. So if we want to do this efficiently, we can probably do it right in between the periapsis and apoapsis, since it is on this angle. And burning this while it's already tilted will just make the polarization a little bit better. So normal is apparently facing Duna's south pole. That's... Wait a second, why is that backwards? Why am I on the wrong side of the... Okay. Okay, that's a little confusing. I think I clicked on the wrong side of the orbit there. Anyhow, we can just fix that. There we go, now it's actually working the way I expected it to. And of course, while we go for this polar orbit, not only do we have to burn apparently anti-normal, we also have to burn retrograde so it stops us from randomly accelerating a lot. Until, of course, we have this thing in an almost perfect polar orbit. Yeah, this is going to take a decent bit of delta V. I think we have plenty. So we'll just try and keep this up. Now, we do want to try and keep it about the same apoapsis, periapsis. The scanner does have a certain height it has to go with, though, so we'll probably aim for a higher periapsis. Or no, it has a limit. Can I find out that limit by right-clicking on it? Oh, we have electric charge. Let's deploy this thing and see if it'll give me the hint on what its actual distance is, because I seem to have forgotten. Perform orbital survey. Oh wait, this is the science awarding one. This is not the, No, wait. How would this... Why is it giving me the option to do it? Doesn't it have to be a polar orbit? Or am I getting something a little wrong here? Ah, well, since it's going to take a while, let's just time accelerate. Let the thing do its process. We have plenty of electric charge for now, so we'll wait. Done. What does that mean for us? Whoa. Oh, wow. I thought we had to be in a polar orbit. Apparently not. Either that or this is very confused. And I might be going with this is very confused because, I mean, it does think that... It very much thinks that normal and anti-normal are opposites. Which is incredibly confusing to me. Why normal is the south pole for Duna, whereas anti-normal is the north pole? That should be the other way around, as far as I know. Anyway, apparently we don't have to get into a polar orbit to do our resource scan here. So let's take a look at the ore density of this. So cut off, we'll just keep increasing it until, okay, now there's none. 70%, there's a lot. Let's go to 80%. Is there any 80% zones? No. So 70% is the best zone. coverage, and there's this huge spot right here, so we probably will land there. Depending on how quickly Duna rotates, because we don't want to land on the dark side, otherwise we can't do any mining. Although it does look to be probably the best place to get resources. So that's probably the current plan. But yeah, I was expecting to need to actually get into a polar orbit, and I almost feel as though this is unfair without it. So how about we actually go into a polar orbit anyway? Now, technically, in order to get into a polar orbit, you have to do two things. You have to stop yourself from moving in your current orbit, so basically burn retrograde in your current orbit, and then burn prograde in the new orbit in order to kind of realign yourself. Now, you don't have to do these two separately. You can do them in one burn to kind of try and save some fuel. Now, of course, I activate the engines, and I also did a little test drive there to see how much fuel it's actually going to take to make this thing go through the node. And I also used the RCS to test how much that's going to boost it. And the RCS apparently is going to boost it about the same amount as the engines, so whatever I have for a burn time is going to be about halved. Now, it took me a little while to figure this out, but I'm actually moving in the opposite direction that I want to, and I couldn't figure out why, since I am indeed facing my maneuver node. So, why might I be facing the opposite direction of my maneuver node? It's a pretty good question, and it has mostly to do with where I'm controlling the craft. Now, I didn't realize this until a little later, and I had used a ton of Delta V and wasted a ton of fuel, and I was becoming very suspicious right about now, because I'm speeding up. I'm actually increasing my movement speed across the Duna. As you can see, my escape from Duna is starting to stretch. It's starting to kind of become more straight. And then I decide to burn in the opposite direction and see what's going on. That's when I realized I'm controlling this thing from the docking node on the back, which basically just means the game is assuming that the way I want to face and the way I want to push my craft is the docking node. The docking node is basically the direction my craft is facing, and that's not true, because the docking node is actually facing towards the back of my craft, not the front of it. So that's why everything was acting backwards. Now, of course, we do end up finishing the maneuver node, and moving on to being able to get the second one of these satellites in place. Now, with the second one, of course, we have the exact same procedure. We fold in the solar panel after opening the other one so we don't accidentally run out of power. We fill the thing up with fuel again because, of course, this one apparently had its fuel drained as well. And we undock it. Now, the first thing I do is say control from here. Well, I tried to, but then I ran out of electric charge because the thing disconnected, and we have a little bit of an issue with this thing kind of clipping into the side of my vessel, and I was 100% certain that this was going to break some stuff. I tried switching to the main craft to actually turn it so it would be out of the way of the probe, but as it turns out, the main craft also had no power and no ability to control it or turn it. So I just let this thing kind of drift the way it was until it finally broke free, and then I just kind of moved it out. Now, a way that you can deal with that is you can just start time accelerating. And what will happen is the crafts will deload their physics, and because the physics no longer exists, they will basically phase through each other. It's a method that can work. I just didn't want to have to resort to it because it's kind of cheaty, and it's also if they don't drift fast enough apart, or if they don't drift far enough apart, then, well, they can generally break. Or if they collide, I should say, if they ever have a tick of physics while they're moving, then they can basically sit inside of each other and collide endlessly, causing them to explode very violently. As long as you don't stop time warp, though, they should effortlessly fall through each other, and there shouldn't be much of an issue with it. Now, this craft had more than one issue, and the main issue I was having with this vessel is the SAS wasn't working. If you notice, the SAS is actually turned on, but it's not giving me that gear kind of node where it's saying, oh yeah, I'm stopping you from trying to rotate, because it acted as if it wasn't even there. The SAS on this little probe was acting non-existent, as if I didn't turn it on, so it was a bit awkward to control. Now, because of that weird computer error, which I'm still not entirely sure what it is about, that we couldn't actually turn the SAS on for this craft, all I did was rotate it in the direction I needed it to face, or as close to the direction as I could face it. I'd time warp, and there goes the ship behind us. I would time warp to freeze my direction, and as long as I didn't apply any more torque, then it wouldn't change its direction, so I could face the node as best I could, although I did have to keep editing it as the thing was burning so that I could keep facing the node as accurately as possible. Now, the first burn to try and get an encounter with Ike didn't work. The weird thing about this encounter is the fact that Ike is actually moving in it's rotating opposite toward us, which means it's going to be very weird getting captured by it. It's going to take more fuel to slow down. Since the way we're burning, we're actually moving towards it, and it is moving towards us. So basically, we're colliding, which means that would be awful to have to land with, since if you're basically colliding with it, then you're going to have a lot more delta V you have to cancel out in order to try and land. Now, I do set my periapsis to be about below Ike as best I can. What happens is because Ike is rotating around Duna, you can see that the actual maneuver node changes quite a bit as we get toward it. But once we get toward it, we just slow down and actually get captured. Because once we're captured, we can tweak with the orbit a little bit to make it more polar. Although I'm not sure if it's going to need polar, just like with Duna, I didn't need a polar orbit to get the scanner to work. But I'd still like to put these in a polar orbit because that's how I believe that they need to be done. Anyhow, with getting all the probes set up, that's the end of episode 21. Thank you guys for watching. This is PTT GRW signing out.